The stench of burning metal and ozone choked my throat. Not the good kind of ozone, the kind that signals your homeworld has just gotten a few degrees hotter. I held the viewport railing with white-knuckle intensity. I wasn't supposed to be here. I should have been coding lines of neat logic on an Alliance feed screen. Instead, they strapped me onto this rust bucket the brass sneeringly referred to as the flagship. Said it would be good for me, a back systems girl, to see a real battle. See how the war worked outside of theoretical projections. And damn, had they been right. The enemy fleet, the Galedran Armada, ripped through ours like a plasma torch through wax. Their ships were obsidian behemoths, bristling with weapons platforms, stark and terrifying against our familiar Alliance cruisers. Every flicker of their shields meant another of our ships went dark, a flare of twisted metal and souls winking out on the tactical display. I stumbled back, the chaos finally breaching my horrified fascination. I knew the Galedrans were relentless, knew their expansionist streak was a galaxy-wide terror. But seeing it, that brutal efficiency, the way they moved like one inexorable organism. It wasn't war anymore, it was extermination. My shaking didn't stop as I lurched down corridors no civilian should see. Blood trails, the frantic yells of the medical triage, the quiet, cold faces of officers who knew this might be their last stand. It slammed into me just how wrong everyone had been. We had simulations, scenarios. We knew the Galedrans were coming, knew they were stronger. And armed with that knowledge, the Alliance had grown complacent. We'd relied on faster ships, more agile shields, clever tactics born out of desperation. It might have worked against smaller foes, but this was a massacre. When I finally stumbled back to my coding station, I wasn't the same neat, efficient Alliance techie anymore. My head echoed with the screams I'd heard in the corridor. Every line of code, every variable, felt insignificant before the relentless carnage burning across space. Hey, a medic hovered awkwardly at the station entrance. The commander figured, with your system's access, you might. I didn't bother to look up. Want me to calculate death tolls? Figure out what's left to surrender? More like. The medic gulped audibly. Well, more like if there's any damn way out of this. Something uncurled in me then a grim sort of determination. I didn't know if I could save us, but sitting idle was the same as admitting defeat. Hours blurred as I dove back into the system's guts, ignoring the ship's groan of protests around me. Battle projections spun before my eyes, losses piling up, a relentless tide of red. Then, just when I was ready to rip my hair out and join those screaming in the corridors, something flickered. A tiny, improbable blip on the edge of my simulation. A combination of variables that sent my heart stuttering. It was madness, the kind of last-ditch longshot that'd get me laughed off a strategy council. Yet, here it was, a path so narrow and chaotic it barely registered. But desperate times call for desperate measures. In that moment, I stopped being a neat Alliance techie, and became something else. I was going to break every rule, exploit every loophole, twist the very laws of physics if I had to, just to buy us even the sliver of a chance. Sir. I burst into the command bridge, chest heaving. The stench of ozone was stronger here, overlaid with the metallic tang of fear. The commander looked up from the tactical display, defeat worn deep into the lines of his face. There's nothing left, technician, he said, voice flat. We're going to. He trailed off, jaw clenched. No, sir, I spoke over him, something wild and reckless in my gaze. I might have something. But it's unconventional. His lips curved in a bitter smirk. Unconventional? That's putting it mildly. We sent out the distress beacon hours ago. He waved a hand at the carnage on the display. No one's coming. The Galedrans will be picking us off in minutes. The words hung between us. There was an odd resignation in his voice that set my teeth on edge. I wanted to scream. Didn't anyone see the flicker of hope, even in its improbable absurdity? Time, sir, I pressed on instead. My solution, if it works, it'll rely on a delicate timing window. We need to make a jump, a precise, blind jump, at a very specific angle. The commander frowned. Jump? We don't even have enough power left for basic evasives. What in the galaxy do you think? Not that kind of jump, sir. My voice trembled, the impossible weight of the plan crushing down on me. I'm talking temporal displacement. If we could shift ourselves, just for a moment, off this timeline. His frown deepened. Are you out of your mind, technician? I couldn't blame him. It sounded crazy, even to my own ears. Yet, a simulation burned a ghost image in my mind, a fleeting path through the chaos, a loophole only accessible if we bent the rules past breaking. I know how it sounds, I insisted, but I found something in the base code. An old project, something they theorized and abandoned years ago. It was never stable enough, but... I sucked in a shaky breath. But if we can push our core into critical overload, just for a few seconds, we might be able to force a temporal shift. Not controlled, not far, a desperate throw of the dice. The commander stared at me, something calculating coming into his eyes. It was the look of someone weighing a lunatic plan against certain annihilation. Finally, he rubbed his jaw. And what do you think you'd find on the other side, technician? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe just empty space. Maybe we tear ourselves apart in the attempt. But maybe we find something to turn the tide. A weapon, an ally, something the Galedrans haven't anticipated. We were out of options, out of anything but hope with fraying edges. The commander must have seen that desperate gleam in my eyes because he surprised me with a grim nod. Prep your calculations. And technician. He paused, a hint of something like respect softening his voice. Don't get our hopes up. Back at my station, my fingers flew. If looks could kill, mine would have burned holes into the code. I was rewriting base protocols on the fly, pushing safety limits into the red zone. It was an intoxicating terror, knowing the fate of our entire ship swung on every line I typed. The alerts blared as energy levels spiked, the ship's core groaning in protest. I heard shouts, felt the deck shift under my feet as auxiliary systems died. The main viewport flickered, the battle outside momentarily replaced by a swirling vortex of nothingness. The heart of time itself seemed to stretch, bending in impossible ways. Then, as suddenly as it started, a jolt sent me slamming into my console. The lights dimmed, the ship shuddered. Somehow, in defiance of everything we knew, we were still in one piece. But where we were? A collective gasp filled the bridge. I scrambled to my feet, staring at the viewport. The Galedran ships were gone. Hell, space itself was gone. Instead, a vast blue and green globe dominated the view, dotted with continents I didn't recognize. And swirling around that alien world, primitive craft of wood and canvas. Galleons, brigs, ships from a history textbook come to impossible life. By all the stars. Where are we? The commander's voice was choked. Earth, I whispered, cold dread washing over me as I pinpointed our position through the navigational database. Old Earth. From the way they build their ships, roughly the equivalent of our. The date on the screen flashed. My stomach lurched. We were 2,000 years out of sync. This is. The commander looked to me, searching for any confirmation that he hadn't suddenly lost his mind. This is before we developed spaceflight. Before FTR, before the Alliance even, I finished for him. But your program, he gestured wildly at the screen, how? I shook my head. An echo, maybe. A temporal anomaly left over from the original project. If we overshot. I trailed off. The sheer reckless gamble of it all hit me full force. A silence settled on the bridge, heavy as a tombstone. We weren't just stranded. We were relics, hurled into a time where no one could help us, where the very technology we relied on would seem like witchcraft. Then the commander straightened, that stubborn spark in his eyes reigniting. Well, he declared, his voice cutting through the despair, there's no use going back. Not until we've exhausted all possibilities here. He was right. We'd risked everything on a flicker of hope, and now, we owed it to ourselves and to those already lost to keep searching for an answer. I scanned Earth's orbit, sifting through archaic satellites for any hint of advanced tech the Galedrans might have left behind. They couldn't simply have vanished. Look. One of the officers pointed at the tactical display. Incoming signal. Hesitantly, we traced the signal to its source. A speck on the vast blue sphere resolved into a coastal settlement along the Mediterranean. We zoomed in, holding our breath as the rudimentary communication systems clattered to life. The faces that filled the screen were a shock. Not the Galedrans, not even human as we thought of it, stern, weathered faces beneath metal helmets, olive skin gleaming with sweat, a disciplined fierceness in their eyes. Who? What are they? The commander muttered. My mind raced through history databases. The armor, the insignia, the sheer disciplined order radiating from them. Romans, I breathed, we've landed in the era of the Roman Empire. Language translation software was a nightmare with an unknown species, let alone dead tongues. The initial exchange was a mess of fractured Latin from my end, confused questions from theirs. But slowly, an understanding formed. These were not peaceful diplomats. They were legionaries, part of an outpost guarding the Republic's farthest reaches. And they were as bewildered by our gargantuan ship hovering in the sky as we were by their swords and spears. The commander took over then, explaining our situation with a skill I hadn't realized he possessed. From across centuries, the essence of our desperation managed to cut through. The Roman leader, a centurion with the bearing of a born commander, listened with unnerving intensity. I watched, transfixed, as his sharp mind grasped the fragments, the impossibility of our tale. When the commander finished, there was a long, pregnant silence. "This Galedran enemy," the centurion said finally, his voice rough with an accent I barely parsed, "do they seek conquest? The subjugation of our world?" The commander nodded grimly. "Worse than that. They're not conquerors, they're exterminators. Planets fall silent in their wake." The centurion's brow creased, a flicker of something like fear crossing his stoic face. Then, he squared his shoulders and a terrifying determination flared in his eyes. "Rome has faced many foes," he declared. "We have endured plagues and barbarians, empires older than our own. We will not fall to whatever creatures come from the stars. Tell me, Skyman, how do we fight this enemy?" I looked at the commander, a flicker of my own wild hope catching fire. This might be more than just stranded survivors lost in time. This might be a chance, a desperate, improbable, glorious chance. Getting the legionaries to our time was another chaotic feat that tested my sanity even further. Using our crippled systems, we pinpointed a deserted stretch of land and managed to initiate a rough pull dash more like a temporal yank, hoping we didn't rip them apart in the process. The sight of 200 legionaries appearing in shimmering columns of distorted air on the deck of our flagship would have been comical if not for the sheer tension crackling in the air. The Romans, for their part, took the impossible shift in stride, their legendary discipline weathering the shock with only the barest hint of wide eyes. Once the initial introductions were made, a task that made the initial communication look like child's play, the centurion, Titus, proved as brilliant as he was pragmatic. We displayed the best recording we had of a Galedran battle. The Romans watched the relentless advance, the destruction their shields caused our ships, with grim faces. Titus stroked his chin, his keen eyes assessing the battle with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. "They move as one organism," he observed. "Singular focus, unencumbered by individual initiative. Which makes breaking their lines nearly impossible," the commander lamented. "They adapt too quickly to our tactics." "But without that cohesion," Titus countered, "they lack adaptability. Disorder them, disrupt their flow, and they might falter." It was such a simple notion, yet a light bulb moment. We'd been focused on matching their firepower, their technology, and had forgotten the oldest rule of war: chaos is the ultimate weapon. Titus moved around the holographic display, scrutinizing Galedran formations. "Their strength lies in their shields and their relentless advance. It leaves them slow in maneuverability, predictable." "But," he trailed off, gesturing at the bulky weaponry lining their ships, "you have not shown me their true strength." "We barely understand half their tech," admitted the commander. "But the best we can guess, it's some form of concentrated plasma weaponry. One good hit, and most of our ships are vaporized." Titus nodded. It was a terrifying image, of disciplined Roman ranks facing down energy blast powerful enough to melt starship hulls. Yet, there was no fear in the centurion, only calculation. Finally, he spoke. "Your warriors in the sky, they remind me of stories of the gods, capable of great feats but lacking the tenacity of men on the ground. Your aerial strategies, while valiant, are like a storm against a fortress. They may batter the walls, but it is the infantry who breach the gates." The commander looked at me. "Can we give the Romans the firepower they'd need?" I ran the numbers, hope warring with skepticism. If we could reroute auxiliary power systems, we can retrofit a handful of transports to carry modified shield emitters. Nothing on the scale of a warship, but enough to provide the legionaries with basic protection while they advance. Titus' eyes gleamed. "My men are trained in close quarters, shield wall tactics. With such defenses, we could get near enough to test the metal of these Galedrans at the point of a spear." The plan was insane, brilliant, and our only chance. Time was not on our side. Every day we spent retrofitting ships was a day the Galedrans could find us, weak and vulnerable on this primitive world. Roman discipline proved as formidable as promised. They learned to handle the shield emitters with frightening speed, adapting their formations to accommodate the new tech. Watching a legionary square off against a holographic training program designed to simulate Galedran warriors was a surreal experience. The speed and savagery of the alien soldier was met with stoic Roman lines, shields interlocking, spears thrusting in a dance of lethal precision. It was brutally effective, something out of a fever dream. Word of our odd alliance spread through the ship. The initial disbelief morphed into a mix of awe and dark humor. Seeing a centurion yelling orders in Latin beside grizzled alliance veterans was the kind of galactic absurdity that made you either laugh or break down. Some did both. Meanwhile, I lived on caffeine and adrenaline, my coding marathons fueled by a heady mixture of fear and elation. This was no longer a theoretical exercise. These were real lives riding on my ability to translate ancient Roman tactics into alliance fire support patterns. Every variable, every predicted trajectory, had the weight of those stern legionary faces behind it. Transport Drop Day was a study in controlled chaos. The makeshift shields pulsed around the legionaries as they crammed into landing shuttles, a sea of bronze and crimson against the battered steel of the ship's interior. Titus stood amidst the chaos, radiating a calm so deep it bordered on the unnerving. "Remember." His voice boomed over the comm system, a rough Latin translation crackling in my ear. "Discipline conquers all? Hold the line, let their strength break on your shields, and strike as one." We watched from the bridge, a knot of Alliance officers and myself, as the transports dropped from our ship's belly into the azure sky. Below, we'd picked out a barren stretch of desert where the Galedrans had established a forward base. It thrummed with alien activity, a pulsating scar upon the landscape. The battle began not with a clash but an eerie silence. The legionaries, tiny figures against the scorching sands, advanced in their disciplined squares. I held my breath, waiting for the Galedrans to erupt, their superior technology obliterating the invaders with barely a thought. Then came the first anomaly. Our sensors, honed to detect the slightest Galedran energy signature, flickered in confusion. Ground units were moving, converging on the legionaries with their usual alarming speed. Yet the readings weren't matching any known patterns. It was as if the monolithic war machine was hesitating. The comm crackled to life. Titus's voice, tight with tension, barked across the channel. "They are confused. Hold the line, for Rome." Then the Galedran front ranks collided with the legionaries. It should have been a massacre, but the shields I'd rushed together held. Not cleanly, the alien energy blasts sent Roman formations reeling, some breaking apart in the onslaught. But they reformed, a ripple of chaos in their perfect lines, yet enduring. "By the stars," the commander whispered, "they're actually doing it." The legionaries, emboldened, switched tactics as programmed. The disciplined squares flowed into wedge formations, stabbing into the Galedran ranks. We cheered, hearts pounding, as the first hulking alien battle suits toppled, Roman spears finding the seams in their defenses. It was a slugfest, brutal and relentless in the scorching desert heat. I recalibrated targeting systems, my fingers flying as I directed our remaining ships to provide covering fire. Every downed transport was a gut punch, every lost Roman formation a cold spike of dread. Yet, inch by inch, the Romans were pushing forward. The Galedrans weren't used to this kind of enemy. They'd never faced a foe that didn't retreat or fall instantly before their might. The sheer audacity of humans, not just withstanding their blows but advancing with nothing more than spear and shield, threw their perfect order into disarray. When Titus gave the order for the final push, we were holding our breaths. The Roman lines, battered and weary, surged toward the Galedran command center, a squat structure bristling with weapons. They'd reached it with a savagery that shocked even me, a whirlwind of swords and desperation against the cool perfection of alien technology. And then, a pulse of energy, not Galedran in origin, rippled from the command center. I scrambled for readings. "They've initiated a self-destruct sequence," I shouted. The battle ceased instantly. The Galedrans, their hive mind linked to the base severed, broke ranks in bewilderment. It was the moment we'd been waiting for. Our ship swooped in, not to engage, but to evacuate. Titus, bloodied but triumphant, directed the orderly retreat back to the transports under the disbelieving eyes of their enemy. On the bridge of our flagship, there were tears mixed with the cheers. It wasn't a perfect victory, far from it. We'd lost too many, taken a desperate gamble. But we had done the impossible. Back on the battered flagship, there was the stunned silence of survivors, followed by a wave of ragged cheers. They'd won a battle, bought themselves time, but the war raged on. It was a victory tinged with the harsh reality of loss. I looked at the Roman ranks, depleted but unbroken. Titus stood among them, his battered armor bearing witness to the battle's ferocity. A bond had been forged in the desert sands, something deeper than just tactical alliance. Later, in the cramped space of my old coding station, the commander found me staring blankly at a screen. When he spoke, there was a new edge to his voice, a blend of respect and something I couldn't quite identify. "You broke every rule in the book," he said, "and you might have just saved us all." "The Romans did that, sir," I choked out. "I just gave them a fighting chance." He sat down beside me, the cramped space suddenly oppressive. "What about the Galedrans, technician? You said they don't conquer. This self-destruct, the fact they left any evidence behind at all." My mind whirred, connecting dots. They're not just exterminators. They're scavengers. They harvest tech, worlds, maybe even the people they conquer. We'd always assumed they simply eradicated any opposition. But now, a chilling realization set in: the Galedrans were leaving something behind on purpose. But why? If they find evidence of Roman tech, mixed in with our own. I trailed off. The commander swore softly. "It's a beacon," he finished my thought, leading them back to a world full of ripe pickings. Earth, unsuspecting and vulnerable, had inadvertently put a target on its back. A new urgency blazed in his eyes. "We need to warn Earth. And we need the Romans to fight beside us once more." He paused, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Looks like we're in for another session of impossible diplomacy with men from the past." Outside the viewport, the Earth swirled, peaceful and blue. We thought we were saving our own hides, bringing an army from the distant past to fight our future war. Yet, it seemed that in our desperation, we might have just doomed two worlds instead of one. The war was far from over, and the stakes were higher than we could ever have imagined.